Hey, my fifth grade friends, Mrs. Real here with another installment of Tales of a Fourth Grade Nothing. There's about 3 chapters left. So when we last left, Fudge had gotten into Peter's bedroom again, had cut off his hair, scribbled on the poster, colored on his face with markers. And so Mom had to take Fudge to the barber. There wasn't really anything he could do, so he has no front teeth and his hair's all chopped up. And then his dad came home with a chain latch for his bedroom, for Peter's bedroom door, to try to keep Fudge out. So my thought to you was, what could you design? Could you do better than a chain lock on a door? If you would like to keep somebody out of your bedroom, what contraption or arrangement or thing could you come up with that might work better? And did you think that the chain was going to work? Because if the chain's going to work, then you just go with that. That's just fine. So I hope you spent some time thinking about it, drawing it, designing it, conceptualizing it, at least thinking about it. Okay, so the next 2 chapters, which is probably what I'll read to you in this video, are kind of a funny part, another funny part of the story, because Fudge is involved. Let's just face it. Fudge is kind of the funny person in this book. So you can follow along here, or just kick back and listen as I read Chapter 8, The TV Star. Start the timer so we don't read the whole day away, which isn't a bad thing either. Aunt Linda is my mother's sister. She lives in Boston. Last week, she had a baby girl. So now I have a new cousin. My mother decided to fly to Boston to see Aunt Linda and the new baby. I'll only be gone for the weekend, my mother told me. I was sitting on her bed watching her pack. I know, I said. Daddy will take care of you and Fudge. I know, I said again. Are you sure you'll be all right? She asked me. Sure, why not? Will you help Daddy with Fudge? Sure, Mom, don't worry. I'm not worrying. It's just that Daddy is so, well, he doesn't know much about taking care of children. Then she closed her suitcase. We'll be fine, Mom, I said. I was really looking forward to the weekend. My father doesn't care about keeping things neat. He never examines me to see if I'm clean, and he lets me stay up late at night. On Friday morning, all 4 of us rode down in the elevator to say goodbye to my mother. Henry looked at the suitcase. You going away, Mr. Hatcher? He asked. My mother answered, No, I am, Henry. My sister just had her first baby. I'm flying to Boston for the weekend to help out. New baby, Fudge said. Baby, baby, baby. Nobody paid attention to him. Sometimes my brother just talks to hear the sound of his own voice. Have a nice visit, Mrs. Hatcher, Henry told my mother when we reached the lobby. Thank you, Henry, my mother said. Keep an eye on my family for me. Will do, Mrs. Hatcher, Henry said, giving my father a wink. Outside, my father hailed a taxi. He put the suitcase in first, then held the door for my mother. When she was settled in the cab, my father said, Don't worry about us. We'll be just fine. Just fine, Mommy, Fudge yelled. Bye, Mom. See you Sunday, I said. My mother blew us kisses. Then her cab drove away. My father sighed while Fudge jumped up and down. Bye, Mommy. Bye, bye, bye. I had no school that day. The teachers were at a special meeting. So my father said he'd take me and Fudge to the office with him. My father's office is in a huge building made of almost all glass. It's really a busy place. You never see people just sitting quietly at desks. Everyone's always rushing around. A person could get lost in there. I'm thinking this might not be a great place to take Fudge. Just saying. My father has a private office and his own secretary. Her name is Janet, and she's very pretty. I especially like her hair. It's thick and black. She has the longest eyelashes I've ever seen. Once I heard my mother say, Janet must have to get up at the crack of dawn to put on her face. My father just laughed when my mother said it. Janet's seen me before, but this was her first meeting with Fudge. I was glad his hair was finally growing back. I explained right off about his teeth. He'll look a lot better when he's older, I said. He knocked out his front too, but when he's 6 or 7, he'll get new ones. See, Fudge said, opening his mouth, all gone. My father said, Janet, the boys are going to be here for the morning. Can you amuse them while I clear up some work? Certainly, Mr. Hatcher, Janet said. You go ahead into your office, and I'll take the boys on a tour of the rest of the agency. As soon as my father went into his private office, Janet took out her pocketbook. She reached in and came up with a hairbrush, some lipstick, and a bag of crackers. Want some? She asked me in Fudge. Okay, I said, taking a handful. Fudge did the same. The crackers were shaped like little goldfish. I nibbled while Janet fixed herself up. She had a big folding mirror in her desk drawer. She set it on top of her desk and went to work on herself. When she was finished, she looked exactly the same as when we came in. But I guess she didn't think so because she said, "That's much better." Then she put all her stuff away and took me by one hand and Fudge by the other. We walked down a long hall through a doorway and into another section of the agency. We came to a room where there were a bunch of kids with mothers. I guess there were at least 50 of them. Most of the kids were kind of small, like Fudge. Some were crying. "Is this a nursery school or what?" I asked Janet. She laughed. "They're here to try out for the new toddle bike commercial." "You mean they all want to be the kid who rides the toddle bike on TV?" "Yes, at least their mothers want them to be picked," Janet said, "but we can only use one." "You mean only one out of all these kids is going to be picked?" "That's right," Janet said. "Who picks him?" I asked. "Your father and Mr. Denberg are doing it. But of course, Mr. Vincent, the president of the toddle bike company, has to approve." Just then a door opened and a secretary came out. "Next," she called to the waiting kids. "My Murray's next," a mother said. "Oh, no, he's not," another mother called. "Sally is next." "Ladies, please, you'll all have a turn," the secretary said. Murray got to be next. He was a little red-headed kid. He wasn't in the other room for 2 minutes when the door opened and a big man with a cigar in his mouth came out. "No, no, no," he shouted. "He's not the type at all." Murray was crying. His mother yelled at the big man. "What do you know anyway? You wouldn't know a treasure if you found one." She shook her fist at him. Janet whispered to me, "That's Mr. Vincent, the president of Toddle Bike." Mr. Vincent walked to the center of the room. He looked around at all the kids. When he looked over at us, he pointed and called, "There he is! That's the kid I want." I thought he meant me. I got excited. I could just see myself on TV riding the toddle bike. All my friends would turn on their sets and say, "Hey, look, there's Peter." While I was thinking about what fun it would be, Mr. Vincent came over to us and grabbed Fudge. He lifted him up. "Perfect," he cried. "He's perfect." The mothers who were waiting packed up their kids and left right away. Mr. Vincent took off with Fudge in his arms. Janet chased him. She called, "But Mr. Vincent, you don't understand." I ran after Janet. Mr. Vincent carried Fudge into the other room. He announced, "I found him myself, the perfect kid to ride the toddle bike in my new commercial." Mr. Vincent put Fudge down and took the cigar out of his mouth. There were 2 other men in the room. One of them was Mr. Denberg. The other one was my father. "Hi, Daddy," Fudge said. "George," my father told Mr. Vincent, "this is my son. He's no actor or model. He can't make your toddle bike commercial." "He doesn't have to be an actor or a model. He's perfect the way he is," Mr. Vincent insisted. "Now look, George, we want to make the best possible commercial for your company, but Fudge can't be the boy to ride the toddle bike." "Now you listen, Hatcher," Mr. Vincent raised his voice. I wonder why he called my father Hatcher, just like Mr. Yarby did. Mr. Vincent pointed to Fudge. "Either that kid rides my toddle bike, or I take my account to another advertising agency. It's that simple." My father looked at Mr. Denberg. "It's your decision, Warren," Mr. Denberg told my father. "I don't want to be the one to tell you what to do." My father picked up Fudge and held him on his lap. "Would you like to ride the toddle bike, Fudge? It's just like the one you have at home." "Why are you asking him?" I said. "What does he know about making commercials?" My father acted like he'd forgotten I was even around. "I'm thinking, Peter. Please be quiet." "Well, Hatcher," Mr. Vincent said, "what'll it be? This kid of yours, or do I move to another agency?" I remembered how my father lost the Juicio account because of Fudge. Now maybe he'd lose this one too, and I don't think he can afford that. Finally, my father said, "All right, George, you can use him, on one condition though." "What's that, Hatcher?" Mr. Vincent asked. "The commercial has to be made this afternoon. After today, my son Fudge won't be available." "I'll worry about that, Peter." Sorry, "That's fine with me, Hatcher," Mr. Vincent said. "Is he going to get paid?" I asked my father. "I'll worry about that, Peter," my father said. That probably meant yes. He'd be paid and have lots of money in the bank. I'd have nothing. And someday I'd have to borrow from him. No, Wait a minute, never! I'll never borrow money from Fudge. I'll starve first. Can I at least watch when you make the commercial? I asked. Certainly, my father said. You can watch the whole thing. I turned to Mr. Denberg. Will Fudge be famous? I asked. No, not famous, but a lot of people will think he looks familiar, Mr. Denberg said. I turned to Mr. Vincent. Do you know he has no front top teeth? That's part of his charm, Mr. Vincent said. And he cut off all his hair 2 months ago? Well, he looks fine now, Mr. Vincent said. And he can't even talk in long sentences yet, I told everyone in the room. He doesn't have to say a word, Mr. Vincent told me. I couldn't think of any other reason why Mr. Vincent shouldn't use Fudge in his Toddlebite commercial. It was settled. Soon Fudge would be a famous television star, and I would be plain old Peter Hatcher, 4th grade nothing. Let's begin right after lunch, Mr. Denberg said. We should get it filmed in about 2 hours. While my father and Mr. Denberg worked out all the arrangements, I asked Janet where the men's room was. She walked me to it. I told her thank you, and that she didn't have to wait. I'd find my own way back. When I was safely inside, I looked at myself in the mirror. I wish Fudge had never been born, I thought. Everything good always happens to him. If he had to be born, I wish he could be 9 or 10, like me. Then Mr. Vincent wouldn't want him to be the one to ride the Toddlebike in his commercial. Janet sent down to the coffee shop for some sandwiches and drinks. After we ate, we all walked to another section of the agency where the cameras were set up. A make-believe street scene was the background. The Toddlebike was shiny red. My father told Fudge all he had to do was ride it around. Fudge liked that. He zoomed all over the place. Vroom, 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 he called. My father, Mr. Vincent, and Janet sat on folding chairs and watched the action. I sat on the floor at my father's side. Mr. Denberg was the director. He said, "Okay, Fudge, we're ready to begin now. You ride the Toddlebike where I tell you, and I'll take a picture of you doing it, all right?" "No," Fudge said. "What does he mean, Hatcher?" Mr. Vincent asked. "Why did he say no?" My father groaned. "Look, George, using Fudge was your idea, not mine." Mr. Denberg tried again. "Okay, Fudge, this is it." The cameraman said, "Start riding this way. Ready, set, go." Fudge sat there on the Toddlebike, but he wouldn't pedal. "Come on, kid, let's go," the cameraman called. "No, don't want to," Fudge answered. "What's with this kid, Mr. Hatcher?" the cameraman asked. "Fudge," my father said, "do what the nice man tells you to." "No, don't have to," Janet whispered to my father. "How about some cookies, Mr. Hatcher?" "Good idea, Janet," my father told her. "I have some Oreos right here," she said, patting her pocketbook. "Shall I give them to him?" "One at a time," my father said. Janet walked across the room to Fudge. He was still sitting on the Toddlebike. "If you do what the nice man says, you can have a cookie," Janet told him. "Show me," Fudge said. Janet held up a box of Oreos. She was really well prepared, I thought. She must eat all day long, what with the crackers shaped like goldfish and a whole box of Oreos, too. I wondered what else she had in that pocketbook. "Give me," Fudge said. Janet held up one cookie. Fudge reached for it, but Janet didn't let him get it. "If you do what the nice man says, you can have an Oreo. Maybe even 2 or 3 Oreos." "First cookie," Fudge said. "First, do what the nice man says," Janet told him. "No, first cookie." "Give him one, Janet," Mr. Denberg called. "We haven't got all day to fool around." Janet gave Fudge one Oreo. He ate it up. "Okay, kid, all ready now?" the cameraman said. "You ride over to me." Fudge didn't do it. Mr. Vincent was losing his patience. "Hatcher," he hollered, "you get that son of yours to ride my Toddlebike or I'm taking my whole account away from you and your agency." "Must I remind you, George? Using Fudge was your idea, not mine," my father said. "Forget about whose idea it was, Hatcher. He's your kid. You better get through to him now." "I have an idea," my father said. He walked to a corner of the room and beckoned to the others. Mr. Denberg and Mr. Vincent gathered around him, along with the cameraman and Janet. They looked like a bunch of football players huddled together talking about the next play. Soon my father called me. "Peter, would you join us, please?" "Sure, Dad," I said. "What is it?" "Peter, we want you to ride the Toddlebike for us, to show Fudge how it's done." "But he already knows how to ride," I said. "Didn't you see him zooming around?" "He won't do it for the camera, though," my father explained, "so we need your help." Will I be in the commercial too? I asked. Well, the toddle bike is really for very young children, Mr. Denberg said. Otherwise, we'd have you do it in a minute. I got the message. It was like buying the shoes and like it at Dr. Brown's office. They were going to use me to get Fudge to do what they wanted him to. I wondered how anybody would ever manage my brother without my help. I walked over to Fudge and told him I was going to ride the toddle bike. Get off, I said. Fudge held on to the bike. No, mine! It's not yours, my father told him. But Fudge wouldn't move for anything. He closed his eyes and screamed. Can he scream loud when he tries? So my father had to pull him off the toddle bike. Fudge kicked and kept screaming, and I'll bet Mr. Vincent was sorry that he ever spotted my brother in the first place. I got on the toddle bike. It was so small my knees practically touched the ground, but I managed to ride it around just where the cameraman told me to. See how nice Peter can ride the toddle bike, Janet said. Here, Peter, come have an Oreo. You did that so well you can have 2 or 3 if you want. Fudge stopped screaming. Me, he said. What? My father asked him. Me, ride, me. You can't ride as well as Peter can, Mr. Denberg said. Can so, Fudge told him. I don't think so, Mr. Denberg said. You already had a turn. You didn't do what I told you. Me! You want to try again, my father asked. Again, Fudge said. Again, again, again. Well, I don't know, Mr. Denberg said. Well, Mr. Vincent said, chewing on his cigar. Well, the cameraman said, scratching his head. Please, Fudge begged. I never heard my brother say please before. Mr. Denberg said, okay, we'll give you one more chance. Fudge ran to the toddle bike. I got off and he jumped on. Now? He asked Mr. Denberg. Now, Mr. Denberg said, ride this way, Fudge. Over here, toward me. Fudge did as he was told. Just like Peter, he said. See, just like Peter. Janet gave me a kiss on the cheek. You saved the day, Peter Hatcher, she said. When she wasn't looking, I wiped off my face. Her kiss was too juicy. Chapter 9, Just Another Rainy Day. The next day it rained. My father asked me how I'd like to go to the movies. Just me? I asked. No, all 3 of us, he said. Fudge is very young to go, I said. Don't you think so? Maybe, but I can't think of anything else to do with him, and that will take up a few hours. You could give him some socks, I suggested. You know how he loves to play with your socks. Socks won't last the whole afternoon, my father said. That's why I thought of the movies. What'll we see, Dad? My father checked his New York magazine. A Bear's Life is playing in the neighborhood. How does that sound? What's it about? I asked. A Bear's Life, I guess, my father said. It's rated G. I was thinking of a good Western with lots of action, or else a picture rated R where you can't see it unless you're under 17, unless you're with your parents. But my father had made up his mind. A Bear's Life it was. I suggested that my father get Fudge cleaned up, because by then he was looking kind of messy. I don't think my father even put him into his pajamas last night. He's been wearing the same polo shirt ever since my mother left yesterday morning. By 1 o'clock, we were ready to go. All 3 of us wore our raincoats and our boots, and my father took his big black umbrella. One thing about New York, it's hard to get a cab when it's raining. But the movie theater wasn't very far away. My father said the walk would do us all good. There were a lot of puddles. It was really boring. I like to walk in the rain, especially if it isn't too cold out. It feels nice when it wets your face. I jumped over the puddles. My father avoided them too, but not Fudge. He jumped right into every one and splashed around like a little duck. By the time we got to the movie theater, the bottoms of his pants were soaked. My father took him into the men's room. He stuffed a bunch of paper towels up each pant leg so Fudge wouldn't have to sit around wet. At first, Fudge complained, but when my father brought him a big box of popcorn, he forgot all about his stuffed pants. Right after we got settled in our seats, a big boy sat down in front of Fudge, so he had to change seats with my father. Now he was on the aisle. I was in the middle, and my father was on my other side. When the lights dimmed, Fudge said, "Ooh, dark." I told him, "Be quiet. You can't talk in the movies." "Okay, Peter," he said. That's when he started throwing his popcorn. At first, I didn't notice, but I wondered why the people in front of us were turning around every second. Then I heard Fudge whisper, "Pow, pow, pow," and I saw him throw a handful of popcorn. I poked my father. "He's throwing his popcorn," I whispered. My father reached across me and tapped Fudge on the leg. "If you throw one more piece, I'm going to take it away from you." "No throw," Fudge said very loud. "Shh," said the people in front of us. "Shh," Fudge said back to them. "You see," I told my father, "he's too young for the movies. He doesn't understand." But from the moment the first bear came on the screen, Fudge sat still and watched. And after a while, I forgot all about him and concentrated on the movie. It was much better than I thought it would be. It showed all these bear cubs and how they live. I'm not sure when I realized Fudge was gone. I guess it was when I turned to ask him if he had any popcorn left. I had already finished mine and was still hungry. I was really surprised to see he wasn't there. I mean, one minute he was sitting right next to me, and the next minute he was gone. "Hey, Dad," I whispered to my father, "he's gone." "What?" my father asked. "Fudge isn't in his seat." My father looked over. "Where did he go?" "I don't know. I just noticed he was gone." "Let me out, Peter. I'll find him." "Should I come too?" I asked. "No, you can sit here and watch the rest of the picture. He's probably wandering around by the candy counter." I stood up to let my father out. I wondered what my mother would think if she knew Fudge was lost in the movies. A few minutes later, the picture stopped, right in the middle of a scene. The soundtrack trailed off like a broken record. All the lights came on. The audience let out a groan. Some kids called, "Boo! Boo!" Then my father and two ushers and a man in a suit came over to me. "He was sitting right here," my father told them, pointing to the empty seat on the aisle. "Well," the man in the suit said, "we've checked the restrooms and the office. He's not behind the candy counter. We'll have to search the theater." He cupped his hands around his mouth and shouted, "Ladies and gentlemen, may I have your attention, please? We'll continue with our film in one moment. But first we have to find a 3-year-old boy answering to the name of Fudge." Some people laughed when the man said his name. I guess Fudge does sound funny if you're not used to it. I thought, maybe he's been kidnapped. Would my mother be mad? That crazy kid, you can't even take him to the movies. And I thought, who'd want to kidnap him anyway? "What should I do, Dad?" I said. "Why don't you walk up and down the aisle and call him, Peter?" "Okay," I said. "Here, Fudge," I called, starting down my aisle. I sounded like I was calling a dog. "Come on out, Fudge." When I got down to the first row and called, "Here, Fudge," he popped out at me. He scared me so bad I yelled, "Oh!" "Hi, Peter," he said. "Hey, I found him," I called. "I found him. I found him. Here he is." Then I turned to my brother. "You dope. What are you doing way down here? And why are you sitting on the floor?" "Wanted to touch the bears," Fudge said. "But bears are all gone." He spread out his arms and said, "All gone again." My father and the ushers and the man in the suit ran to us. "Fudge," my father said, scooping him up, "are you all right?" "He wanted to pet the bears," I said. "Can you beat that?" "Well, I guess we can continue the picture now," the man in the suit said. He cupped his hands around his mouth again. "Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Our young man has been found safe and sound. Now we return to the conclusion of a bear's life." My father carried Fudge back to our seats. He held him on his lap for the rest of the show. I guess he wasn't taking any more chances. Later, when we got home, my father explained to Fudge that movies are like TV. It's just a picture. There's nothing to touch. Fudge listened, but I don't know whether he believed my father. I had the feeling he still thought those bears were in the theater somewhere. I made up my mind that I would never take my little brother to the movies. Never. At least not until he was 9 or 10. My father said he was going to cook us something special for dinner to celebrate finding Fudge in the movies. I thought that was really strange, because as far as I know, my father can't cook anything. He doesn't even know where my mother keeps the peanut butter, the dishes, or the pots and pans. Lucky for him, I was there to show him. "What are you going to cook, Dad?" "A super duper omelet," he said. "Omelet? I'm not sure me and Fudge like omelets." "You'll like this one," my father said, humming as he gathered his ingredients together. "Get me a big frying pan, Peter." "Okay," I said. I gave it to him. He melted some butter in it. "What's going in the super duper omelet?" I asked, while Fudge sat on the floor, banging 2 pot covers together. "Well, the eggs, of course," my father said. "Omelets are made of eggs." "And what else?" I asked. "Oh, I think I'll make a mushroom omelet." "Eggs and mushrooms?" I said. "Yes, you'll love it." "I'm not so sure." You'll see, Peter, my father said. I set up the table while my father cooked. I even put Fudge in his booster chair. When the omelet was done, my father brought it to us. He was still humming. That's some big omelet, I said when I saw it. It filled up the whole frying pan. How many eggs did you use? About a dozen, my father said. Mom only cooks one at a time, I told him. When you taste this, you'll know why I use them all up. You mean it's that good? I said. Go on, my father said as he served me. Taste it. I took one bite. It was awful. The worst thing I ever ate in my life. But my father was standing there grinning at me. I didn't want to hurt his feelings. Well, he said. It's nice, I told him, swallowing a chunk whole. I washed it down with a glass of milk. You see, your mother ought to experiment more. Then you'd learn to eat a lot of different things. I don't think Mom ever made me a mushroom omelet, I said. My father put some on Fudge's plate. Then he served himself. Fudge shoved a lot into his mouth at once. I waited, figuring he'd choke on it. Instead, he said, "Oh, good." My father beamed. Fudge wasn't smart enough to fool my father, so he must have really liked it. But a kid that can eat flowers and swallow teeth wouldn't know much about omelets anyway. Then my father sat down and tasted his super-duper concoction. He not only choked on it, he spit it out. Oh no, he said, this is awful. Something went wrong. Maybe the eggs are rotten. Mom just bought them on Thursday, I said. Maybe it's the mushrooms then, my father said. Maybe it's how you cooked it, I suggested. My father jumped up from the table and threw the mushroom omelet into the garbage. Fudge started to cry. Want more? More! No, my father told him, it wasn't any good. Fudge screamed, eat it or wear it! Eat it or wear it! He flung his spoon across the room. It hit my mother's favorite plant. The dirt spilled all over the kitchen floor. Now you stop that, my father yelled at Fudge. I'm going to make us nice peanut butter sandwiches. Then you're going to have a bath. Your mommy's coming home tomorrow, and we're going to show her how well Daddy managed all by himself. Peter, where does your mother hide the peanut butter? After supper, my father bathed Fudge. The only thing he decided not to do were the dishes. He stacked them in the sink and left them for my mother. On Sunday afternoon, we drove out to the airport to meet my mother's plane. On the way there, my father said, wouldn't it be fun if we kept all the things we did over the weekend a secret, just between the three of us? Kind of a man's secret. I agreed not to say a word, and my mother was so glad to see us that she didn't even mention the dirty dishes in the sink. 6 weeks later, we were watching TV one night when the new Toddle Bite commercial came on. That's me, Fudge said. My mother looked up from the book she was reading. He does look like you, Fudge, but that's not really you. Oh, yes, Fudge said, that's me. See? My mother squinted and looked harder. You know, Warren, she told my father, he really does look like Fudge. Then she laughed. Imagine another little boy like Fudgy. It's Fudge, all right, I said. It's Fudge, all right, my brother repeated. We didn't tell you, dear, my father said. We thought you'd like to be surprised, but that is Fudge. What? My mother said, like she couldn't believe it. You see, Mom, I began. Remember that weekend you went to visit Aunt Linda? Then I stopped and thought about all the things my mother didn't know, like the puddles Fudge splashed in, and the paper towels up his pants, and how he wanted to touch the bears, and the mushroom omelet, and Mr. Vincent and his big cigar, and Janet and her goldfish crackers. And I looked at my father, and I started to laugh. So did he. All right, my friends, we're stopping for this video. We have one last chapter. So if you have not yet started to think about what contraption you could come up with to keep an annoying baby brother out of your bedroom, take some time to do that before we get to the very last chapter. And we'll see if that chain worked on Peter's door or if you came up with something better. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.